Hello, my name is Jennifer Wood. I'm a member of the Methods Core of Robert Wood Johnson's National Program Office for Public Health Law Research. This presentation is designed to provide potential applicants for research funding, as well as others working in the field, with some basic information about the use of qualitative methods in public health law research, as well as the importance of designing rigorous qualitative studies. The field of public health law research consists of a variety of topics, disciplinary perspectives, and methodological approaches. This presentation will focus on the value and potential roles of qualitative research and the need to follow some key criteria in the development of rigorous qualitative research proposals. There are various ways in which qualitative research can contribute to the PHLR program's mission of building evidence to assist in the development of effective regulatory, legal, and policy solutions to improve public health. I'll begin this presentation by defining qualitative research in relation to the goals of the PHLR program. I will then provide examples of research questions within PHLR that qualitative research can help to answer. In doing so, I will provide illustrations from published studies in the field. While discussing different data collection methods, I will also outline other key elements involved in the design and implementation of qualitative research, including, but not limited to, sampling, transcribing and analyzing data, and conducting research that conforms to ethical standards surrounding the use of human subjects. I will end this presentation with a qualitative research checklist designed to serve as a basic guide in developing rigorous qualitative project proposals for our program. For a full definition of the nature and scope of public health law research, please refer to the PHLR website, and in particular the Methods Guides page that can be found under the Research Resources tab. On this page you'll find an article written by the Methods Core Group titled Making the Case for Laws That Improve Health, a Framework for Public Health Law Research. This article was published in a 2010 issue of the Milbank Quarterly. On this webpage you will also find a podcast delivered by Scott Burris, director of the program, titled What is Public Health Law Research? For the purpose of this presentation, we can define public health law research as the scientific study of various relationships between law, legal practices, and public health. By scientific, we refer to a systematic process for collecting empirical data, and by empirical we mean rooted in experience, that responds to clear research questions and engages with a clear theoretical framework. Researchers in this field are often concerned with tracing the effects of a law or laws on concrete public health outcomes, that is, laws' impact on public health. In other words, they are concerned with building evidence as to whether law contributes to or undermines the health of a population. So here we are referring to research that examines direct relationships between. Qualitative research has the potential to guide different areas of inquiry within the field of public health law research. Regardless of the discipline within which it is practiced, qualitative research is concerned primarily with the study of meaning, including beliefs, understandings, and interpretations of circumstances. In particular, it seeks to understand how people experience certain situations, conditions, and events, and why. It is interested in explaining both how individuals and groups think about certain issues, problems, and phenomena, as well as why individuals and groups act in particular ways. Qualitative researchers look to understand meaning in context, that is the social, cultural, organizational, political, or geographical context shaping the lives of the populations and groups under study. Qualitative researchers therefore seek to provide in-depth, context-bound accounts of the meanings people attach to their experiences. Meaning can be discerned from different types of text, including written texts, such as laws, policies, or procedures, and oral texts, such as personal narratives or stories, as well as human action, that is, what people do as captured by what researchers observe them to be doing. Given the above definitions of public health law research and qualitative research, We can now begin to think more specifically about roles that qualitative research can play in answering different types of public health law research questions. In the table that you see here, I've provided some examples of general questions or areas of inquiry that can benefit from the use of qualitative research designs. This list is not exhaustive and should be seen more as a set of examples. On the right-hand side of the table, I've provided examples of potential sources of empirical data that could serve as valuable sources in answering the general questions found in the left-hand column. In the next set of slides, I will provide examples of published studies that have explored one or more of the above general questions. Looking at our table, we can see that qualitative research has value in answering how and why questions. For instance, in the face of a growing base. In the above slide, we discuss some areas of inquiry in public health law research that qualitative research can help inform. In the next few slides, we outline some qualitative data collection methods that have been shown to be useful for public health law research. This, of course, is not an exhaustive list. The methods discussed are individual or in-depth interviews, focus group interviews, and field observations. The value of coding legal texts for the purpose of measuring law and developing legal databases is also covered. Finally, I outline the value of mixed methods research, including the blending of qualitative and quantitative methods in different combinations depending on the research question posed. In what follows, I'll briefly describe the role of each data collection technique, and then I will reference a published work in PHLR that describes the use of this technique as part of an empirical study or methods discussion. Interviews are a commonly used method of data collection. Interviews can take place with individuals or groups. They can be structured or unstructured in nature. It is important to decide which type of interview is appropriate for your research question. Structured interviews use standardized and closed-ended data collection instruments, such as surveys, that can be administered orally in person, over the phone, or via the internet. Asking specific pre-framed questions allows researchers to collect data on large samples of populations, data which can then be analyzed quantitatively for trends or for relationships between different variables. This is because answer options are limited and respondents have to choose from options provided. Answers from respondents can therefore be compared. Surveys can also consist of open-ended questions, which allow for narrative-based responses. Sometimes open-ended questions are used to extract more in-depth information yielded from responses to closed-ended questions. Group interviews allow researchers to speak to more subjects at once, but sometimes, depending on the topic, a group dynamic might serve to silence individual participants or reduce the degree of depth that can be produced through one-on-one conversations. In-depth interviews that are more open-ended or semi-structured in nature allow researchers to explore an issue about which little is known, or about which a deeper understanding is required in order to develop or refine a theory. In-depth one-on-one interviews, which are relatively time-consuming, often between 20 minutes to 90 minutes in length depending on the study, serve to tap into the unique knowledge and experiences of the interviewee. Researchers usually have a question guide that allows them to focus the conversation, but the researcher leaves space. A focus group is a type of group interview designed to facilitate a synergistic dynamic among participants. The researcher as focus group facilitator directs the group by making sure it explores the central questions of concern. However, a focus group is meant to be interactive. One participant may offer an insight which then prompts another participant to build on that insight, or contradict it, or refine it. In essence, no focus group will be the same because each group dynamic is different. Researchers therefore serve as facilitators of a dynamic group process designed to yield as much insight as possible around a set of questions. They need to be active listeners who help steer this dynamic in productive directions. Just as it is important to develop interviewing skills, it is important for researchers to know how to facilitate a focus group. And we encourage researchers to acquaint themselves with methods texts and training modules that address aspects of how to be a good focus group facilitator. An example of a study that used focus groups was one conducted by James Ciardi and colleagues, who set out to explain how it was that regulated pharmaceuticals were being channeled into illegal markets for sale and use. They refer to this problem as prescription drug diversion. They wanted to gain a better understanding of how such diversion schemes operated, including how people could obtain such drugs once they reached the illegal marketplace. The best source of data for these researchers was drug-using populations themselves. They spoke to different segments of such populations, including ecstasy users and methadone maintenance clients. Use of such sources was a unique feature of the study, which sought to build on what was already known, based on research looking at the actions of players such as doctors, physicians, and the internet, about the nature of the diversion problem and the complexities of its regulation. Sometimes direct observations of people's behavior and conversations are the most appropriate method of data collection. This might be the case with vulnerable groups who may be uncomfortable in an interview setting, or it may be the only way to get at the researcher's central issues of concern. Observations may serve as the most thorough means of understanding how a group process or set of dynamics occurs. Being in the natural setting of subjects allows researchers to observe behavior in the raw, as it were. Being an observer is a skill, just as interviewing and facilitating focus groups are skills that are honed through knowledge and experience. Training on how to be a good observer is very valuable, such as that contained in a course on conducting field work. It is important for researchers to avoid disrupting the research site as much as possible. This might mean blending in, staying on the sidelines, or immersing oneself as a participant observer who has been accepted as a temporary member of a group. Just like interviews and focus groups, this form of data collection requires researchers capable of building trust and rapport with the subjects of their study. Observers must be skilled note-takers, able to record their observations in detail after each time they are in the field. Ethnography is a particular form of observational research. It is concerned with studying the values, norms, and traditions that shape the thinking and practices of particular groups. Understanding the culture of the group can yield insight into why people behave in the ways they do. Ethnography can therefore play a role in the study of law's implementation by, for example, studying the culture of an agency or studying the compliance behaviors of groups targeted by law. One example of a study that employed observations was conducted in India. The research team wanted to better understand the dynamics between police, known for undermining public health goals surrounding sex work, and community-based and non-governmental organizations devoted to implementing a harm reduction program in the sex worker community. This research looked at law's implementation from a particular point of view, exploring how a traditionally powerless group, represented by non-government organizations, sought to change the enforcement of sex work behaviors in furtherance of public health outcomes. This study is a good example of public health law research that addresses the role of non-state organizations in the promotion of public health. Studies, including the ones listed above, often employ multiple methods for collecting data. Some studies may use different forms of qualitative data collection, or may mix quantitative and qualitative methods. As in other fields, public health law research can benefit from research designs that incorporate mixed methods. Getting the mix right is important. Qualitative research could precede a piece of quantitative research. For example, it could explore issues inductively through a small sample of the population to generate hypotheses that could then be tested deductively through a representative sample of the population. Alternatively, a quantitative study might generate results that we want to further explore qualitatively. For example, a quantitative study may provide evidence that a law has been effective in achieving the public health goals that it was designed to achieve. Conversely, the same study may show that there is no evidence to suggest that a law has achieved its goals. Qualitative research can shed light on the why question through examining the mechanisms through which law may or may not affect population health outcomes. It could be that the underlying theory regarding how the law would change behaviors or environments, ultimately resulting in population health outcomes, has been put into question by your data. Methodologically, qualitative research might most profitably follow a piece of quantitative research that lays out the population health outcomes of concern. Qualitative research can also shed light on the inputs that are conceptually linked to the outputs and outcomes of concern. An article recently published by Tremper, Thomas, and Wagonar in Evaluation Research lays out another important way in which qualitative and quantitative methods can be integrated to good effect for public health law research. Often, the law as written needs to be characterized in some universal and straightforward way, especially for comparative purposes. The above slides were meant to illustrate ways in which qualitative research can serve the goals of the growing field of public health law research. The next set of slides move beyond the topic of data collection techniques to other elements of qualitative research that should be considered thoughtfully to ensure the design of a robust qualitative study. An important issue to consider when developing a proposal for a qualitative research project is sampling. Probability sampling strategies, most commonly found in quantitative research, seek to make sure that the sample represents the broader target population. It is designed to ensure that everyone within the target population has the same chance of being sampled. Such an approach can be suitable for large-scale qualitative studies as well. Indeed, some qualitative projects may seek to produce findings that are generalizable to large populations, even populations of a nation or an ethnic group. The data collected to achieve this level of generalizability could, however, suffer from lack of depth. With this in mind, various other options are more commonly used in qualitative research. Sampling procedures generally fall under the category of purposeful sampling, a few examples of which I'll provide in the next slide. Obviously, one's choice of sampling procedures depends on the research question or questions posed, the types of data collection methods deployed, the availability of participants and other sources of data, and the resources of the researcher. Qualitative research is time-consuming and can be expensive depending on the location of data sources. Qualitative research can also be a more intensive or time-consuming process for new researchers or those with little experience in qualitative methods. Experience over time, however, can help make the process easier. It is therefore important to ensure that the objectives of the proposed study are aligned with what is achievable at the level of data collection. In considering one's sampling strategy, bear in mind that a sample size needs to be just right. Too small of a sample can limit the theoretical contributions and external relevance of a study, while too large of a sample can compromise study depth. Again, it depends on one's research question. In any scenario, it is important to be very clear about the ways in which one's findings may have relevance beyond the individuals, cases, or sites studied. In other words, it is important to articulate a nuanced view of generalizability, where you discuss whether your findings are more widely applicable to broader groups, institutions, or processes, and why. As another point to keep in mind, an important means of monitoring sample size, which could change as you conduct your research, is to monitor what is commonly termed data saturation or content saturation. This refers to a point at which new data is not yielding new insights. One means of ensuring that you've reached the saturation point. The following list identifies some common purposeful sampling techniques, but it should be noted that this list is not exhaustive. Descriptions of other techniques can be found in standard qualitative research methods texts. Criterion sampling involves a selection of participants who meet one or more criterion of interest. An example might be one's position within an organization, or one's level of expertise on a particular topic of interest. Maximum variation sampling involves the selection of sites or participants that are different along various dimensions or criteria determined in advance. The broader purpose of this approach is to document variations or differences in perspective. Homogeneous sampling works to reduce variation along certain dimensions, selecting participants or cases that are similar in some ways. One study, for example, might be concerned only with the experiences of a particular vulnerable population, such as injection drug users, as opposed to, say, a broader category of drug users subject to drug enforcement practices by police. Opportunistic sampling, as the term suggests, means that researchers follow new leads, take advantage of unexpected opportunities, and simply gain access to new subjects whenever they have the chance. The study on homosexually active men highlighted above used an opportunistic sampling strategy. This group of persons is generally hard to reach, so it is important to explore all recruitment opportunities, including working with community-based organizations or health clinics to help advertise and recruit for the study, or to take advantage of raw data produced by others on the sample of interest. Sample size can be unpredictable when it comes to qualitative research with human subjects, especially given the fact that participation by subjects is voluntary. Snowball or chain sampling involves researchers expanding their sample by asking previous participants to nominate other potential participants. Such a strategy can be effective in a range of settings, including work organizations with which researchers may not be completely familiar. Researchers doing field work in community settings can also benefit from this strategy, as they may not know beforehand which community members play key roles in different community activities and processes. Researchers may choose to deploy different sampling strategies in combination, strategies which could change over time depending on one's findings and depending on whether one determines that new or different samples are needed to enhance the quality of the study. Again, it is important to tie one's sampling strategy to one's research question. Written texts are already there waiting, in the raw, so to speak, to be analyzed. Oral texts and observation data are other matters. An often neglected component in the design of qualitative research studies is the establishment of clear protocols for the recording and transcription of data. The researcher is the data collection instrument and must be able to capture narratives and observations in a comprehensive manner. It is typical for researchers to digitally record interviews, focus groups, and even their own observations. Video recording might also be appropriate. Recording data in this way has obvious benefits, such as providing a verbatim account of the research encounter. Qualitative data analysis is an iterative process, and indeed the analysis phase already begins while the researcher is collecting data. The diagram here captures data collection and analysis as a cycle. Analytical insights can drive researchers to collect more or different data, meaning that the qualitative coding generally follows a two-stage process. For the first stage, the text that is the subject of the analysis, whether it be, for example, legal texts, interview transcripts, or field notes, is broken down into segments that are assigned names or codes. The names or codes at this stage are descriptive in nature. For the second stage, researchers move up to a more abstract level of analysis, which many described as focused coding. Here the descriptive material is sorted into broader concepts and themes, or even categories that are then subject to numerical coding depending on the purpose of the research. These concepts, themes, and categories are ultimately refined and related to one another as the researcher develops a theoretical account of the empirical findings. Again, the iterative process is important here. One's theoretical framework, and more broadly one's theoretical training, influences the coding process, while codes then prompt the researcher to reflect back on their theoretical framework with a view to modifying this framework as part of their theory-building efforts. As part of this process, researchers may need to move back and forth between the descriptive and the conceptual codes. It is now common for researchers to take advantage of qualitative analysis software that can assist with the organization and coding of data. Such software, such as Atlas TI or NVivo, does not, however, serve to replace the analytic work carried out by the researcher. The software, if understood correctly, can help to enhance the efficiency of the analysis process and provide some useful tools for presenting data, such as charts and visual diagrams, including network views of relationships between concepts. The software makes it easy for researchers to code text segments as well as to write memos or reflections on those segments. It is useful to check to see if training on the use of Atlas TI or NVivo is offered in your host institution, and whether your institution has a license to use the software. For any research that involves living humans as data sources, it is important to be aware of some overarching ethical considerations. Research involving human subjects is governed by federal law, as well as the procedures of institutional review boards found in each university and in some agencies. In accordance with IRB rules, you will need to develop a research ethics protocol that addresses issues, such as any possible risks to either the subject or the researcher, such as the potential to incur emotional or physical harm from the research process. When interviewing people, for example, it is important to be sensitive as well as alert to the fact that discussing certain issues could cause some emotional discomfort, anxiety, or even distress. Of course, this depends on the topic and whether or not the researcher is speaking to a vulnerable group. If there is any conceivable risk that such a scenario might occur, it is important to have a protocol in place that explains what types of decisions would be made and at what points in time. For example, terminating an interview, calling in a support person. As a conclusion to this presentation, the following checklist is offered as a basic guide in the development of qualitative public health law research proposals. As with any study, it is important to begin with a clearly defined research question or questions, couched within an explicit theoretical framework. Your proposal must engage meaningfully with the relevant theoretical literature or literatures, but must also engage with this literature in an interesting way. Links to relevant methodological literatures should also be established. The significance of your study should be readily apparent, and to a range of audiences across disciplines and practitioner arenas. To this end, it's important to write with clear and accessible language which would appeal to persons from different backgrounds. It is important to explain in detail the qualitative approach or approaches that you will use to gather the data needed to answer your research question. Your rationale for choice of data collection technique must therefore be made explicit. Description of an appropriate strategy for sampling and identifying data sources must follow, a strategy which is aligned with your data collection method and your research question. Within your clearly defined project scope and in accordance with project resources, you must divide a data collection strategy that. For your reference, this slide provides examples of other pieces of qualitative public health law research which may be relevant as you plan your study. In general, please consult our website for other resources that may be of help as you develop your project ideas and proposals. Thank you.